bit of review about Scrum before we even start. Did you know that Scrum came out with a 2020 Scrum guide? There were some changes in it. First of all, in order to use Scrum, you've got a team with 3, they call them accountabilities now: product owners, developer, Scrum Master. You've got 3 physical things, the artifacts, and you've got 5 events. The only big change on that is that the Scrum team now consists of product owners, developers, Scrum Master, as opposed to a development team. It was confusing to people for that. What we're trying to get is more holistic view on these kind of things. The artifacts and the events have stayed the same. One of the reasons they call the Scrum roles, they used to be roles, now accountabilities, is they're trying not to say that one person is a Scrum Master, one person is a product owner, one person is the developer, and that should be a role upon your company that you hire for. It's trying to say that you are accountable for that behavior. So it's a slight change. What's really interesting, though, if you'll notice at the bottom of the slide here, we now have 3 commitments. These are things that have been talked about in Scrum before, but not really codified in the Scrum guide. Does anybody remember what the commitments are?
Yes.
No. Tell me a couple.
They're the product goal, the sprint goal, and the definition of done.
Yes, yes. So for years, we've talked about the definition of done, but we've never really said, what is it? It's just like some kind of a thing in Scrum. Now it's called out as a commitment. So for the product backlog, it has a product goal. That we are trying to meet the product goal. That's the whole purpose of the product backlog. For the sprint backlog, the purpose of the sprint backlog is to make the sprint goal. Now, the purpose of the increment is to be able to make something that aligns with done. It's done. It's our commitment to the increment that we're building. And by the way, as we're working our way through this, if you have questions or comments about it, if I just lecture, it's going to be boring for me and you. I don't want that to happen. I want this to be as interactive as we can get it. Okay? So there are the commitments: product goal, sprint goal, definition of done. Now, here's a quick reference on these things of the events. When we plan, we're looking at the product goal, product backlog, and we're figuring out, should we have it as a sprint goal? What should we have as a backlog? Sprint backlog. Shows you what the daily Scrum is. Sprint review. We're looking at what we've created. And the retrospective, we're looking at how we've created it. So if we think about the definition of done, where would the definition of done be used on this? Open this up to the group of people. Which event? Oh, I know. Go ahead, Paula. You know one?
I can do it.
Yes, thank you. You're so engaged. I love it.
I'll try to stay engaged. I mean, the definition of done is going to be every time you look at a story that's, where are we, right? I mean, yes, we inspect the definition of done in the retrospective, but, in the review, does this meet our definition of done? In daily Scrum, is this now at definition of done? Can we move forward in sprint planning? Just remember, guys, this is what done looks like.
And also in sprint planning, you're going to be looking at it too.
Yeah, I think that's what I said, but I could be wrong.
Okay, maybe I missed that. In all of these events, it's really looked at. So this definition of done, what is it? It's a shared understanding what it means to be complete with something. Scrum team creates it. Definition done, it's managed by the Scrum team. Oftentimes you can look at a definition of done as being a checklist. Does your I'm going to say PBI, product backlog item, rather than story, because stories, you can use different kinds of things in your backlog. But does it meet this checklist? Yes, 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 or not applicable in some of the cases. So the definition of done, you can look at it like this. Got all these product backlog items. When each one is complete, as one is being completed, you're looking at this checklist of the definition of done and saying, does it meet that? Does it meet that? Does it meet that? There's not a different definition of done for every product backlog item. It's just an overall thing. And we're going to get into some of the details of what one might look like in the future. This is one thing I see a lot of times is people say, okay, I got a definition of done for this product backlog item and another one for this, another one for this. No, 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 no. It's one big list. So during sprint planning, what do we do with it? Well, taking a look at the definition of done and saying the things that we perhaps are picking for a sprint, will they be able to be completed? Will they be done? What's important at this point? At the sprint review, you're looking at it and saying, things we've completed, were they done? So if you look here, the flow of the sprint review, only completed features may be shown in the sprint review. So what does completed mean? It means that those things comply with your definition of done. So as you're going through the sprint review, you're making sure that your definition of done and the items that you're showing match up. If you have something that's not really done, well, I suppose in the sprint review, you could look at it, but you need to call out that it was not complete. You got more stuff to work on it. That should be the exception rather than the rule, of course. Okay. So some takeaway on this. The definition done is now part of Scrum's definition. It's a commitment for the increment. So let me pause here for a minute. Is everybody okay so far? Doing good? All right. Thanks, Denise. I see David's face is on there too. Thanks, David. Okay, let's press on a little bit more now. Now we got an idea. Yeah, it's important. It's something we should have. Here's a good idea. Here's a good thing from the Scrum.org material. I take some of the slides from the Scrum.org material to show it to you here. So let's say this, your team is one of 7 teams working on a new application. It's life critical and it's shipped internationally. Use 2-week sprints. Each team has all the skills needed to develop the product into a done increment. So it's life critical, international, multiple teams. And this is a picture of a pacemaker, and I don't know what that is. People say it might be an insulin pump. But in any case, what would you put in there for definition of done? I'm just going to put myself on mute for a little bit and get your opinions on this. If nobody says anything, I'm going to call folks out. How's that?
Done means it has to meet a certain level of testing, a certain level of quality has to be met within before it can be called done. It has to work. It has to not break what's already out there.
So fail safe. Okay. So
It
hey,
has, sorry, Dr. Chuck.
I'll ask Angela one because I know her.
Yep.
Who cares about this 7 teams? What does that have to do with it?
They all have to have a common definition of done, so they're all working in the right direction. And making sure everything comes together and is tested as those teams, check in every 2 weeks. The other one I was thinking about when he said safety was regulatory. It's international. So it has to meet regulatory standards and compliance for wherever it's going internationally.
Yep. Some countries are more strict than others for sure.
Correct.
What else about this international? Paul, you were going to say something in there too.
But yeah, I was gonna say, I mean, obviously, whatever's in those backlog items that we have said, the acceptance, that has to meet the acceptance criteria. What did we say this was gonna do? Does it do what we said they asked us to build? Right? Does it, not just the testing, right? I mean, if we've not done it, how do we know we've hit all those? Everything is testable if we have not bumped it up against the acceptance criteria.
Exactly right. Well, one of the things about this is if you're doing a 2-week sprint, what's your definition of done going to be after 2 weeks? I've tested it in the field. Boy, I don't want to be the test case every 2 weeks.
Ours is tested in an environment that is comparable to production, but
I would say every 2 weeks, it has to be tested with the other teams to make sure that your increment works with the other 17's increment.
Sometimes there's organizational or domain impediments to getting things really, really in production and going every couple weeks. I used to work at a place that did nuclear warfare simulations and tanks too, the kind that shoot. You don't want to test that every 2 weeks in the field, but you would get as close as you could. So on this particular one, it's got to be tested like crazy to be bumped up against international regulations. Should be integrated. As you were saying, Paul, it should do what we thought it was supposed to do. Should have training, should have manuals, should have installation guides, should have fail safe. So some of the things here. Let you read through that for a second. Variety of pieces. So we're trying to move towards something with a definition of done. It's a little bit more precise than this. So it requires some testing. We've already said that. I want to draw something for you. So I'm going to stop this share. And I'm going to share my other tool. 1 minute. By the way, if you hear a peculiar sound, that is my dog snoring. He refuses to leave the room and insists on snoring. Okay. I got to do this in a technical way because honestly, it works best for me. I'm a technical kind of guy. I'm going to ask you some questions here. When things are done, can I ask you, Jim? You're going to be nice to me?
See what happens. I'm not promising any right answers though.
Okay. Hey, when your work is done, does it work on your machine?
It should work on any machine.
And the code compiles, of course. I'm not trying to be facetious, just.
Well,
Do you
yes.
do you do a peer review on the code?
Yes.
Okay. And this could be the same for documentation too. If you're making marketing documentation, it doesn't have to be technical. How about this? Do you do unit testing?
Yes.
Integration testing with other groups?
Yes.
Do you check it into a source control?
Yes.
Oops. Just a second. Do you
Did I
do,
freeze?
pardon me?
Hold on. You kind of froze there for a second. I didn't hear what you said.
Pardon. Is it working now?
Yes.
Okay. Said internet was unstable. Do you version the source control?
Yes, sir.
Do you tag the code?
Yes, sir.
Do you package the code somehow, like a WAR file or something?
Yes, sir.
Pardon me, just a second. Okay. Do you have some sort of a user acceptance testing?
Product owner at this stage of our game.
How about documentation?
Yes.
Okay. So like a user manual?
On some varying level, yes.
Help text.
Can't answer that. I'm not sure. I would assume we do at some level, but I can't answer for sure.
Okay. How about performance testing?
Yes.
Do you sometimes have pieces of software that you run? Like if you're going to a new database, it unloads the old one, changes the database, and then reloads it?
We're actually currently working on that for one of the teams. Yes.
Okay. Do you have people that do help? Support group.
You mean help if a customer or a user runs into an issue?
Yeah,
Yes.
first level support. Okay. You tell them it's coming, right?
Hmm?
You tell them a change is coming, right?
Yes.
Okay. You tell marketing before you install. I know that, right?
Based on what we're working on in the future case, yes. Right now, our customers are all internal.
Okay. So I could go through and put a lot more things in here. Like maybe you got some kind of compliance. I'm thinking, man, you got a lot of stuff for definition of done. And some of these things, and the reason I'm drawing it out like this, I'll explain in a second. Some of these things you can't always do every 2 weeks because you have external dependencies or something like that. So the way I'm drawing this is like so. Currently, your definition of done should be tactical at the PBI level. So it should apply to every product backlog item. And I'm not going to ask you any more questions for a while, Jim. Thanks. And strategic at all levels. So what I've drawn up here is this. Usually when a PBI is complete, you're making sure that these things are done, and this might be your current state. When the sprint is done, you're making sure that these things are finished up before the end of the sprint. Before you release, you got to make sure that all these pieces are done. And if it's already in maintenance, you're doing these particular items. And the reason I'm drawing it like this is not to say this is a series of gates that you go through, but this is trying to capture your current condition. And you should do this back at the home office, all of you. The reason we're doing this is so that we can bite off more pieces of this over to here as much as we can. As an example, user acceptance testing. People don't just willy-nilly grab your product and start testing it. They probably got some kind of a spreadsheet. They probably got some kind of a document. Here's one now, my test cases. So they got a document with test cases on it before they do UAT. So as part of your definition of done, you'd say update UAT doc. You might not be able to do all of them, but you're updating some of it. How can you bite off the user manual? Well, you might not be able to have it all beautified, but you can actually print out the user manual. Here's one now. And say, as part of our definition of done, write the user manual changes. Even if it's with a pencil, just writing it in, make sure it fix this. And forcing yourself to get stuff closer and closer to done so that each one of these different areas is just like a flip of a switch rather than a big pile of work. Compliance too, you can do this kind of stuff. So your definition of done, you should be able to apply it at the PBI level, but you should be able to get as much as you can from each one of these levels. And when you go to that level, pull the trigger then. Now, here's one thing about it. If you just take it to the level that I've explained this, you'll only get a little bit of goodness out of this definition of done, not as much as if you go there and you force yourself every once in a while to look at this quadrant list and pull things in sooner, counterclockwise. Figure out ways to get things more complete. And by the way, I will share these drawings after the class. I'm going to take a pause here and make sure all y'all is doing okay with this. And if so, I'm going to pop back over to the slides a little bit. That whole thing can be summed up as saying PBIs. They're tactical. In other words, they're applicable at the PBI level, the definition of done is. But it's strategic at these different levels. We're trying to pull in as much as we can, forcing ourselves, challenging ourselves to get things closer and closer to done. You can't always test on lab rats every 2 weeks, but you could sure get the procedures ready for it, order them up and infect them if that's what you're doing. Maybe I shouldn't say that. Well, another way to look at this. Your definition of done, you want a better definition of done? Your risk goes down as your definition of done bites off more of integrated, releasable, or even released. It gets more predictable too, because you don't have this big pile of wax that you have to finish up. Who knows what it is? This will help. So try to get your definition of done and look at it frequently. How can we make it better? So some of the things that can help you with this: there's product, there's development standards. So besides just kind of making up your own ideas, there are different standards that you can pull out, product and development quality. So far, so good. The definition of done and retrospective. Let's talk about this. Why you would want to look at your definition of done occasionally, at least. See, is it right? Is it too tight, too constraining? Or is there a way we can improve the quality on it? One of the better ways to do that is to look at it at your retrospective. One of the things that, in fact, in scrum.org, they say, look at the retrospective, look at how you're doing things, look at the retrospective and the definition of done. Is it tight enough? Is it not tight enough? Let's figure that out. I want to give you an example of this. I'll go back to my drawing here for a moment. It takes me a second to bring that up. Come on. There we go. So I once had a group. who had this kind of thing. They did some coding for 2 weeks. Then they passed it over to QA, 2 weeks. Then they did bug fix, 2 weeks. So were they doing a 2-week sprint? Not really too much, huh? It was a well-recognized problem with these folks like, well, that's the way it's got to be. Well, we did some changes in the retrospective, try and figure out how to make this really complete in 2 weeks instead of actually 6-week sprints with the cascading dependencies. So we went to the retrospective. I was doing some agile coaching at the company, and I said, okay, we need to skinny this down. How can we skinny it down? They changed their definition of done, make things more complete. They added a new thing here, simple thing. When coding is done, show it to QA people. That seems like a silly one. We'll just show it to the QA people. Go figure, they never really did that before. So they would call up the QA people and say, hey, come over here and look at this. Or they'd get them on the phone or on a video chat, say, hey, look at this, see if this is okay. And then the QA people might say, ooh, I'd test this if I were looking at it. And the developer might say, ooh, I didn't think about that. Or, well, you can't test that because of X, Y, Z. And it just brought things a little bit cheaper, just a little bit closer, just that one change. We started to move it closer. Sprint number 2, the next one, we added something else to the definition of done. Actually, we didn't put on definition done. We put it as a note. If a bug is found within the sprint, then they didn't have to make a quality center QC ticket. I don't know about you, but if you've ever used QC, quality center, apparently writing up a problem is like pulling teeth. Not very much fun. So about putting out this rule that say if you found something during the sprint that is being created, you don't have to write up a ticket. Man, the QA people were happy as a clam. They wanted to find those problems earlier, and the developers were even happier. They didn't get this QC ticket tagged against them. It didn't solve the problem completely, but it helped. We were using the retrospective to get more close to done. A couple sprints later, we went to the retrospective and said, let's make it better. Here's what the team, pardon me, here's what the team came up with. They said, okay, the QA people can execute kind of a pre-test with a special ID in the dev region. The reason we didn't start right off with that is first of all, the QA people and the dev people didn't really trust each other too well. So it took a little while to get this. But now the QA people were not only come over looking at the thing, they were doing a little bit of pre-testing first before it was even moved over. That made a big difference up here. Eventually, we got to the point where we also had automation by QA has been done. So QA people were starting to do some test automation before they actually got the code, which was great. That was about when I rolled off of that project. So how much further they got, I don't know, but they were heading down the tracks in the right direction. Point of the matter is, definition of done should not be static. You can use it as a way to improve your quality and get closer to completion, particularly if you inspect it at the retrospective. One moment, please. Let me go back to the slides for a minute. So to sum this section up a little bit, definition of done, it's not really helpful if it's just like a barrier and nothing is ever done for sprint after sprint after sprint after sprint. You need to push yourself to get done on that thing. And the other point of this is you should purposely evolve that definition of done as time progresses. Retrospective is the place to do it. What would happen if I'm in the middle of the sprint and I decide to change the definition of done? Not so good, eh? You're now shooting at a moving target. Okay. So I'll pause here and see if you guys are doing okay. If that for me, that means, do you have any questions or anything you want to add to this?
I'll say that we have had that happen. We've had the definition of done change in the middle of a sprint. It was not enjoyable.
Always a good reason not to do it. Yes. You're shooting for a moving target. I guess you could make it easier. Relax that definition of done. That's like.
I'd be curious. Excuse me. I'd be curious to ask who changed the definition of done. Did the team change it mid-sprint, or was it kind of dictated?
It was dictated. It came from above. Essentially, they were working to change the process, and they didn't want to wait until a sprint boundary to make the changes.
That's not cool.
No.
Sometimes weird things like that happen. I mean, if you have like a 4-week sprint, that's nasty. 2-week sprint, not as bad, but not saying that was a problem. All right. So if done's not a defined concept, you just don't get stuff done. Go figure. Product owner doesn't know the progress toward the product goal. You don't know how much to select in sprint planning. Scrum teams don't know what's being really reviewed. It's pretty important. I've actually worked with a lot of companies where I come in and I say, where's your definition of done? The answer is, definition of what? You mean ready, right? Nope. Okay. So we're trying to get rid of this technical debt deal also by making our code work better. If we don't do that, if we just let badness continue to grow, pretty soon we get into the point where we spend so much time trying to change our spaghetti code that we end up rewriting the system. Time for a rewrite. The code's too brittle. because the definition of done will help. I'll skip over some of this a little bit. We talked about stories a little bit. That's one way to do it. I do want to point this out. Some acceptance criteria on stories. People usually write product backlog items in the form of a story. Acceptance criteria is not a definition of done. Acceptance criteria means, how do I know I'm done with that, what I'm finished with that particular PBI? What are some of the things to look at? So don't get those confused. Definition of done applies to every story or every PBI, sorry. Acceptance criteria applies to one in particular one. So I'm going to get to that in a minute here. The definition of done is not a sprint goal either. Hang on a second. Here's the one I want to show. Let me reshare this with you, please. Hopping around a little bit, just based on timing of this. So if you have a product backlog item, it probably has multiple acceptance criteria, maybe one, I don't know. The definition of done, as I'm showing here in the green box, encompasses them all. An acceptance criteria can be verified through one or more test cases. And you might have test cases that are not part of acceptance criteria. Just things that are more general, like it works on an iPhone as well as an Android. Okay, maybe that's or better yet, I got this version, this system, set up these data files, and then bring it up in your iPhone Safari. That might be some better test cases. So the level of detail is definition of done is more encompassing. Acceptance criteria is more focused around the business need of finishing out that product backlog item. Test cases oftentimes are much more focused on what data you need, what pieces you need, how you set that up. So they are different. And then on top of all that, kind of a skew to it, when you create a sprint, you probably have a goal for that sprint, the purpose of that sprint. And that is fulfilled by the PBIs that you have picked. So it's kind of off to the side from those. So don't go through and try and write test cases as a definition of done statement, or even test cases and acceptance criteria that much lower. There are different things all the way around. Oh, so let me go back a little bit. Now that I've talked about those, sorry to keep popping this open again. Talk about one more concept that'll help you with this definition of done. Hey, Wendy, it's nice to see your happy, slappy face there. Let's put this on not sharing. Okay. Doggone it. One more second, please. Sorry about that. When I project my slides, it boots me out of sharing, whether I like it or not. So I want to make sure and differentiate this sprint goal here. I want to give you a chance to read through this Word document here, this eye chart. Take a look at these. These are things for looking at a sprint and saying, what's the purpose of a sprint? Let me give you just a minute or so to read through this. And I want to know if there's one that particularly resonates with you.
Really? I think 6.
We suddenly have half the team available because we had COVID. A lot of times people like the one that says, if we're paying for the sprint with our own money, what will we get out of this?
I've used number 2 frequently with our product owner, and it always makes him stop and go, oh yeah. I mean, he has to pause and think about it. And that's how we sometimes have to craft that vision for the sprint goal.
Yeah, I like number 4. We've used the sprint goal to give clarity to what we're producing, and we've gotten a lot more impact and feedback from the stakeholders with it, which is phenomenal.
Right on. So I hope that by reading through these, you can clearly see that the sprint goal and the definition of done are two different things. Sprint goal is a reason for the particular sprint. The definition of done applies at a slightly smaller level per product backlog item. That was the whole point of this. one more moment, please. Sorry to stop sharing again. Now I'm ready to share. Boy, this one's going to be hard. Here's one of the fun exercises from our product owner class. Either definition of done, sprint goal, or acceptance criteria. So I'll tell you what. You want to show me a 1, that's definition of done. 2, sprint goal. 3, acceptance criteria. Increase product responsiveness. Go ahead and give me your vote. What are you showing me there, David? So it kind of depends on the context, doesn't it? It could be the sprint goal. It could even be the acceptance criteria, depending on how you're using it. So if it's looking at the overall picture, it would be on the definition of done. Doesn't seem make sense there as much as it does to say, oh, well, maybe that's a sprint that we're going through. Or maybe that is part of the acceptance criteria for one of the small changes we're making. How about this? Documentation is updated. Yeah, nice. How about works with a keyboard and a gamepad? It could be a 3. It could also be a 1 if it's already there. Or as a matter of fact, if you've never used it with a gamepad and you're trying to change everything, that could be a sprint goal too. Demonstrated to the product owner. Let's look like this to me. No unreachable components. We'll just finish up with that one. I get a 1. I get a 3. So it depends on what you're working on and where you are. I would tend to lean toward definition of done unless you have one particular PBI that's going through and making changes to your system to do that. So this is purposely put together to have a discussion, not to have a succinct yes, no answer. Giving you a chance to think about it. So some takeaways on this. Definition of done is not acceptance criteria. That's at the finite level. It's not test cases. That's at the verification. There's probably a bunch more test cases than acceptance criteria, one would hope. And they're more concrete, shall we say. So are these good or bad statements? And a definition of done. Thumbs up for good, thumbs down for not so good. It's in production. It might be good, but if you have something that's like testing implanted medical devices, whoa, not so good. Staged for UAT. Again, it's kind of contextual. Meet regulatory compliance. Unless your regulatory compliance has some sort of a review by lawyers or doctors or something like that. How about this one? Sent to print production. In other words, you have something, you got to send it off to these printers. Not the device, but the people. Angela, are you waffling there? I don't know. It's not really ready if it's sent. Well, it depends. Again, maybe those printers take forever to do that. So the point of the point of the presentation comes up to this. The definition of done is tactical at the PBI level. In other words, you can apply it at the PBI level. It's strategic as much as you can get it. At all the different layers, it's useful. But if it's not, if as long as it's not a barrier to completion, I've seen people have definition of done that said, "Oh, it's gone through legal and compliance." Well, you know, they don't get to it for 6 months. It's never done. It just hangs there. What do I do with it? I don't know. Market is done. Put another PBI to review what they say. The definition of done must be purposefully evolved. Best in the retrospective. Definition of done is not acceptance criteria or a bunch of test cases. So, what the heck? Who put that in it? So here's a little bit about me in case you want to talk to me sometime. I put my Twitter handle out there, but I haven't tweeted in so long, it's not even funny. But I do want to open this up for a few minutes for questions. Do you have any comments on this? How can I improve it? Or just things that you thought of with going through this?
I really like your presentation, Chuck. Actually, I'm going to talk to my team about definition of done tomorrow. So this is really great timing. A lot of these slides I'm going to bring in. One of the things that they wrestle with is they have different types of work. They have an IT change request. They have an ECO. They have so they are suggesting they would like to do a definition of done for each piece of that. And then a PBI or a bug. Is that acceptable?
Certainly is if you have different classes of work there, which it sounds like you do. I just put it on one big old honking document and a little checkbox that says not applicable. That might be just as easy.
Okay, when you say not applicable to all of them as a whole or just to each and every one of them
Well,
as we go
you're
through?
doing this one class of work and you've got this definition of done statements down here that
Mhm.
deal with a different class. I just put not applicable since it's
Okay. Perfect. Thank you.
If your definition done is overly complex or complex at a point to where it's a pipeline process, how do you prevent people from becoming idle within a sprint? So say like you have engineers, QA, you know, obviously you've got to produce the item before it can be QA'd. And towards the end of the sprint, you're trying to have everything done. You know, you don't want your engineers to be idle.
Kanban combined with Scrum with a work in process limit and the ability to hop forward on the line. The kind of complex answer, but if you have a Kanban approach where each of these swim lanes has a work in process and you can only pull when you have capacity and you're done with all your stuff, you're drained, you're just waiting there, you're looking up the stream. So why is it drained? Well, these people are not done. So you can hop over to a different lane and help them. Maybe not as efficiently, but it's a way to kind of self-level. If you want to learn more about that, I'd recommend going out and watching a couple of videos on scrum.org on Kanban. Did that help at all? It's not going to be so much of a definition of done thing as.
Yeah, I've used Kanban before in different contexts. So I'm, you know, familiar with it, but it's been a while. But it'd be interesting to see the combined approach.
Yeah, that's the Kanban class that Scrum.org teaches. It's like super powerful, I think. Other thoughts or questions? Well, Wendy, do you want to say something happy and snappy to wrap us up?
You're so funny. I really appreciate all of you joining us for this session today. I always learn major things from Chuck. You know, so often he brings up things where I had never thought of it in that context before. We've got just a slew of classes on schedule. I don't know if I have the ability to share my screen. Do I, Chuck?
Yeah, as far
I
as I
haven't
know,
used Zoom in a while. I don't think so, since I'm not the presenter.
I have
But I'm
given
gonna,
everybody has the opportunity to share.
they do?
So
All
if you
right,
want
what
to
am I
try it,
doing wrong? Up there it is. I just wanted to share. Am I doing it properly here?
apparently not.
Apparently not. So I apologize for that. We do have quite a few classes on our schedule. I did put it here in the chat to everybody. And, you know, if anybody has any questions, by all means, give us a call or reach out to me. We will be sharing the slides and Chuck's presentation with you as soon as they're finished with that, okay?
If there's nothing else, I thank you. Jim, you got something to say there or just off mute?
Nope, just hanging out. Ready to speak at the drop of a dime if I need to.
Yeah, like a sour grape. Good. Cool.
Thank you for this. This was good.
Thanks, everybody.
All right.